Now, I have as my guest today, he's a guy who knows something about the heat. Not only has he been in Arizona just for a long, long time, but he was a deputy sheriff, chief deputy sheriff in Maricopa County here in Arizona. And I want to welcome to the podcast Jerry Sheridan. How are you doing today, Jerry?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Jerry, you were on. Go ahead.
I've got a quick, funny story about the heat.
Okay,
I was a young deputy. We used to wear cowboy boots, and they had to be highly polished. So I was standing there directing traffic one day, and it was so hot, I looked down, and the wax had melted off my boots. And it was surrounded my feet like chalk marks. That's how hot it was here in Arizona.
Jeez. Well, now, you probably spent enough time directing traffic. You were on the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for 38 years, was it?
38 years as a full-time employee, and 2 years before that, I was a volunteer reserve deputy sheriff. So I spent a total of 40 years wearing the uniform of a deputy sheriff.
Okay, so let me give our audience just a thumbnail sketch here of what's going on, and then we're going to get into it. So you are from the state of New York. You have a genetic makeup that leads you into law enforcement. I think your father and your grandfather were New York City policemen. You moved out here after your father retired, and at a young age of 18, you became a jailer for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Then when you got old enough, became a deputy. You worked your way up through the ranks to deputy chief, retired a couple years ago, and now you are running for the sheriff position of Maricopa County this year, the election here in November. You've won the primary for the Republican ticket, and so that kind of brings us up to date. Now, what I would like to talk about is you were born and raised there in New York City.
I was Queens, New York. My grandfather was not a police officer, but my dad and my uncles were.
Oh, okay.
And it was my uncles, and I grew up around them and all their friends, and it was a big family affair back in New York. And when we moved out here to Arizona, I was 18 years old. I discovered the sheriff's office, and you could be a sworn officer in Arizona back then at the age of 18. So I became a volunteer reserve deputy sheriff. And then when I figured out I needed a job, I became a detention officer. And then I went on to be a deputy sheriff and retired as the chief deputy in December of 2016 after a total of 40 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And I'm telling you, it was an honor and a privilege to wear that uniform every day and to serve the public and be a leader in the sheriff's office.
Well, I tell you, and if anybody listens to my podcast, I say it almost every time because it always just amazes me. Being in law enforcement as an officer especially is not a career, it's a calling. It's just something about it. You just want to, help people and make sure justice is served, and it's just something that gets in your genes, and you miss it. And when you leave, it's a mixed emotions, I know. So you started out as a detention officer. How was that back in the day? That was 40 years ago. What was that like?
Well, it was the jail I worked in was pretty crude. It was bars like Alcatraz. You had to pull the lever to unlock the doors, and then you had to pull another lever to actually open the doors. It was a no frills jail.
Oh,
it was
boy.
quite different than the modern facilities we have today.
You know, and I tell people that was probably the most valuable experience to prepare you for the road deputy that you could ever have. When I'm retired from Pierce County Sheriff's Office up there in Washington State. Mm-hmm. And people have heard me talk about it before, but part of the probationary period, they would put you up in the jail to work the jail for 30 days, just so you could see what it was like. So when you put the arm on someone and said, you're going to jail, you know what you were doing to the poor guy. And I'm telling you what.
Yeah. Well, you also get to know how to talk to people. You know, law enforcement is a people business. And I think one of the issues we see around the country today is we're hiring officers and deputies that come from a generation that has spent most of their life growing up on an electronic device, on a telephone, on an iPad, on video games, and they've lost the skills and ability to communicate with people. And that's not all of it, but it's a part of it. Because I also taught at the community college level for 22 years, and I also noticed over that time that as time went on, you know, the students were less and less engaged with each other, and certainly with me as the instructor. And I figured out one day, walking in the campus, that they're not talking to each other. They're all on their phones, texting each other, probably texting each other right next to each other for all I knew. And they're walking through the campus. No, there was no conversation anymore.
Well, you know,
and that's important because law enforcement is about dealing with people. We're in the people business.
I agree 100%. In fact, that is a common theme that I hear from veteran officers. In fact, one of my good friends here in Mesa has been on, you know, almost 20 years. And I asked him what advice he'd give to a rookie. And that was what he said: learn to talk to people and communicate. He said, I get these young guys out here and they just don't know, they don't take the time or develop the skills to be personable, you know, with someone. But anyway, so you started out in the jail, and like I say, that's valuable experience for anyone. And let me ask you this. Now, this is something I noticed when I worked the jail. There was guys up in that jail that I continued to run into my whole career, the same guys.
Yep.
They get out for a while and go back in. They get out for a while, and there you see them on the street over and over again. Did you have that experience, Jerry?
Yes, I did. And there's one inmate in particular. When I was a detention officer, he was the funniest guy in the house, right? And he was just hilarious. If he would have put his mind into being a comedian, he would have been the next Chris Rock or Richard Pryor or something. And years and years later, now I was a lieutenant, a deputy sheriff lieutenant, and I happened to be working in the transportation division of the sheriff's office. And here he comes. I recognize him immediately on the chain, but he wasn't that same happy guy anymore. You know, he'd been in and out and in and out of that system. So I pulled him aside and I talked to him, and he remembered me. And he said, yeah, he said, you know, the drugs are just eating me alive and all that. And I felt bad for the guy because, you know, I thought about him for a lot of years and wondered what happened to him. And there he was on the chain, looking, you know, 50 years older instead of the 15 years older that he should have looked.
Yeah, it's a hard life for telling them. Well, one of my favorite podcasts, and maybe you know the guest I had, he was the director of prisons there, Ernest Turillo. I don't know if you know him or not, but he was he just retired here recently. He was the director of Arizona prisons, and boy, I tell you, he could tell you some stories about the inmates. You know, half of them are geniuses. You know, if they just apply what they were, the con they were doing on the street, or they just fly to something law about it, and they'd be all clover.
Yeah.
But anyway, so now you got on as a deputy. Tell me about your rise through the ranks. How did that go for you? Was it a straight line up? Or?
Well, I can tell you that my dad was a grunt Marine in the Korea War era, and he when NYPD he retired as a lieutenant. And when I came out here, I got hired as a deputy sheriff. He looked at me and he said, "You know what, kid?" He said, "Just like in the Marines, it's a boss's job. Things are easier for you, and you can do a lot more things for the people that work on the line if you have rank and position." And so that's what gave me the drive, the idea to put my time in as a deputy sheriff. Got promoted to corporal, had a squad, and then I got promoted to sergeant. Of course, I had a squad. Then I was a lieutenant and, of course, captain of a couple of different patrol substations. And then one day I got a call from Sheriff Joe and said, "I want to see you." So I drove down there and, thinking, well, what did I do now? Why am I in trouble? And he said, "Hey," he says, "Yeah, right? Don't we all have that guilty conscience?"
Sure, yeah.
And he says, "Hey," he says, "You ready for a change?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, Sheriff," because, you never tell your boss no, right? And he says, "Oh, you want to go to Gila Bend?" Well, I live in Fountain Hills, so that's a long drive to go to Gila Bend every day to go to work. And I said, "Sheriff, that's where you want me to go, I'll go." And he looked at me and goes, "No," he says, "I want to promote you to chief over the patrol bureau." Wow. And that's how I got promoted to chief. Every one of those other positions, you have to test, you have to take an interview, you have to apply for the job. I mean, it's not easy to get promoted.
Yeah,
and this was the first time that, he just called me on Wednesday, and on Friday I had brought my wife and kids down there. And next thing you know, I was chief over the patrol bureau for the entire county, which is 9,000. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's 9,226 square miles. It's bigger than 7 states.
Jeez.
And today we have about 4.5 million people here. It's quickly growing right now it's the the 4th largest county in the country, and it's quickly going to become the 3rd largest county. It's the fastest largest growing county in the nation and has been the last 3-4 years.
My goodness. Well,
so I
do. I had as my guest, I think I mentioned this to you, Larry Went. Now, did you take his place? Was that it, or how'd that work? Or he was the deputy chief, wasn't he?
Larry and I, we were deputies together a long time ago, back in the 70s. And, we've known each other since then. And Larry went his way, I went my way. And Larry was the chief over the jails. So Larry had retired, I think before I made chief. Patrol.
Yeah.
And then after chief of patrol, I did that for about 3 years. And then Arpaio came back and said, "Jerry, are you ready for a change?" And I said, "Oh, you're going to send me to Gila Bend?" And he goes, "No." He says, "No, I want you to run the jails for me." And I said, "Sheriff," I said, I haven't been in the jails. I haven't been a detention officer for 20 years. And he says, "Oh, that's okay. I like the way you do things." And so I ran the jails for 12 years, and we helped design and plan for the biggest jail construction project ever undertaken by any county to this day. When we built, I didn't build it, the contractors did, obviously, but when we built the 4th Avenue and Lower Buckeye Jail, the infrastructure, the food factory, the transportation hub, all those things and hire thousands of people to do that. I did that during my tenure, besides run the fourth largest county jail system in the country every day. It was quite the experience. And little did I know, and I know we haven't really gotten to this yet, how much that experience was going to make me a better candidate for sheriff. And then after that, the sheriff came to me one day and he said, Jerry, he said, I want you to be my chief deputy. I need some help. I need you to help me fix this. And so I was his chief deputy for 6 years, and I can tell you they were very difficult years because we had the ACLU, the Obama DOJ, and a federal court case that I was not involved in, but I did get involved in it because I was the chief deputy. And that was very difficult. And that consumed probably 5 of the 6 years that I was the chief deputy. Every day. Yeah,
that was quite a thing. Yeah, and that was one of the, I was glad that President Trump stepped in and did the pardons and all that sort of thing. But now, a lot of people, like you say, okay, you're going to build a building, that's one thing, but to build a secure facility, I don't even know where to begin on that, Jerry. I mean, you must have learned so much. I mean, a building where, it's got to be escape-proof and the transportation hub and all that. Oh, my, I don't even know where to begin on that. Jeez.
Yeah, well, you work closely with the architects.
Sure.
And you tell them what you want. You tell them what you need. And what we wound up with was a combination. At the 4th Avenue jail, it's probably the most secure county jail in the nation. And at one time, the U.S. Marshals brought in some very serious MS-13 gang members that no other county jail in the country could handle. They brought them to us, and we kept them for 6 months without incident, by the way. And that's how secure and what a good job the architects, my staff, did in designing that facility. And what we did is we took Pelican Bay in California, a very infamous jail, according to the ACLU, and the Iman complex in Florence, Arizona, this Arizona State Prison System. And we took the best features out of both of those facilities to make our Supermax cells. And that's what we did. And it worked out great.
Wow, that's good.
And it's super secure. And it's secure for the inmates themselves and for the officers that have to work there.
Okay, so you are now running for sheriff. So I want to ask you a few questions about that.
Okay.
So you retire, and the current sheriff, former sergeant in Phoenix PD, I believe,
Correct.
After all the Obama harassment of Sheriff Arpaio and the money that poured in from the Democratic Party, Sheriff Joe lost that race to the current sheriff.
Right, including George Soros. George Soros put in $3.2 million into the county race.
So money speaks in these elections.
Sometimes it does.
Yeah. Okay, so were you retired when the current sheriff took over?
Yes, chief deputies retire when their sheriff loses.
I see. Okay.
That is just the fact of life.
Sure.
That's what happens.
Now, your experience in the sheriff's office, and a lot of people don't realize this. They see the deputy out in the street, but they don't realize, and I've got a lot to learn about that. I'm not sure about that, but it seems to me that the jail would take up be more time consuming and work intensive than actual patrol. Is that true? I mean, you have that the facilities, several of them, and plus the staffing all comes under the sheriff's venue. How does that work, Jerry?
The sheriff is broken down. 75% of the sheriff's office is the county jail system in Maricopa County, and the other 25% is the law enforcement side. So you can see that 3/4 of the sheriff's office is the jail operation, and it is very time consuming, very litigious. I mean, those inmates have nothing to do better than to sit there and write grievances and write lawsuits and complaints. And so it takes up a lot of administrative time, especially compared to the patrol function, the law enforcement function, the detective side. And, that's one thing that a lot of people that work in a police organization are not prepared to be the sheriff because they don't have jails. They don't have that function. If they do, it's a little holding cell, temporary facility. It's nothing like the requirements for housing inmates waiting to go to trial and all the civil rights that they have as unsentenced prisoners compared to somebody that's been sentenced to a DUI and is going to spend 48 hours, 30 days in jail. There's different rights. There's different constitutional rights to those types of inmates. And it actually gets very technical. Plus the medical issues they have to be tended to, the laundry, the hygiene, OSHA regulations.
Sure.
You can just imagine the security issues, the crimes that go on behind bars. It's mind-boggling. The crimes that go on over the telephone. Back in 1999, when I took over the jail system, I started the jail intelligence unit to begin to monitor the telephone conversations to stop crimes from occurring, stop attempted escapes, to stop assaults on officers as they were planning them. Over the years, those jail intelligence officers solved murders. They helped other agencies solve murders and other major crimes. And so it's a very important tool that we were able to put together because bad guys behind bars, they don't stop being bad guys. Right? I mean, they continue on with their criminal enterprises.
Sure.
And I can tell you the current sheriff we have right now, he has given them the greatest tool to continue with their criminal enterprises. He's given them iPads. He's given them access to the internet. He's given them access to phone calls over the iPads. And it's next to impossible for the jail intelligence people to keep track of what they're doing. And that is fraught with disaster just for all the reasons I told you a few seconds ago.
My goodness. Okay, so obviously the current sheriff did not have the jail experience. And I think this is, anybody listening is probably news. It is to me. I knew that it was at least 50-50, but I didn't realize that the jails took up 75%. Man, that is a big part of the whole thing. But at the same time, what most people see are the deputies on the road, and we can't ever forget them either. So it's quite an operation being a sheriff. You don't, I mean, it seems to me that you need the vast experience of the jail and street to be effective in that regard. So tell me, what is your vision for Maricopa County if you were elected, Jerry?
Well, the number one thing that I'm going to have to deal with is the crisis of staffing in patrol. They are currently 144 deputy sheriffs short. That represents 25% of the sworn staffing. That means detectives are not there to investigate crimes. That means deputy sheriffs in uniform are not out there in patrol cars keeping people safe. So I'm going to have to deal with that crisis first. And here's how I'm going to start to do it. The stroke of midnight on December 31st of this year, when I become the new sheriff, I will be in my uniform, in my sheriff's truck. And Stacy, my wife of 32 years, wants to come with me. We're going to go out there and drive around to all the substations and tell the deputies there's a new sheriff in town. Just please go do your job. Do not fear the administration any longer. And a lot of people know me from my past history. A lot of people have quit since I left, but they are very vocal supporters of mine. And the word is out there. The vast majority of the people at the sheriff's office want me to get elected. They want me to come back. And to be honest with you, that's the only reason I'm running. I made twice as much as the sheriff does as the chief deputy. So I'm doing all this for half a cut in pay. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this for publicity. I'm not doing this for my ego. I'm doing this for the passion of the love of the job, the people that do it day in and day out, all 3,400 of them, citizen, civilian employees, detention officers and deputies included, and the great job they do for the people out there. I mean, it's a fun job. Even working in the jail, I loved working in the jail also. And it's a job that's very satisfying. And what I want to bring back to all of them is the nobility of the law enforcement job. And I think that's what people talk about. It's in your blood. It's who you become as a person. It's that nobility and pride, and you know it. When you save somebody's life, when you take a drunk driver off the road, when you stop somebody from fighting, it reminds me of a story, just as I said that, of a domestic violence call on Christmas Eve. We go there, the husband and wife are violently fighting on top of the Christmas tree, and the presents are all broken up. And there's two little kids, about 5 and 6 years old, just bawling their eyes out in the corner of the room. And so we took mom and dad and put them in 2 different patrol cars, and I went back in the living room, and those kids, they grabbed my legs, and they would not let go until we got grandma and grandpa there.
Wow.
I'll never forget that.
No.
That's what we do. I hate to see kids cry.
Oh, sure.
That day, I'm talking about this probably 40 years later. That was an emotional moment for me when they grabbed my legs and they wouldn't let go. They didn't want me to leave.
Boy, incidents like that make it all worth it, don't they? Yeah, for sure.
It does. Yeah, you put up with all the BS from the ACLU and all these people that think you're a bad person and all that. You know what? They can go to heck. That's all I can tell them, because we do this job to help people, protect people. There's this whole group, defund the police, and these left-wing ideologies of, about taking away the tools of policing and all this stuff. Let me tell you something. I spent all my life around cops. I never heard one of them say, "Yeah, I want to go to work today and hurt somebody."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you, boy. Yeah. So anyway, how in the world did we get a deficit of 144 positions?
Huh. Very easy.
Is there resources to hire, but they're just not, or can't find people? How's that work?
No, I'll tell you, the money's already budgeted and allocated.
Okay.
It's a complete lack of leadership from a sergeant from Phoenix PD. That's the current sheriff. He has no. Here's my opinion. I have a master's degree in organizational management. So I've taken some psychology classes. I've taught leadership at the college level. My opinion, my learned opinion, is he has had no command experience whatsoever. His claim to fame, he was a sergeant in the public relations field at Phoenix PD. That's where he made his mark, at Phoenix PD. So now he steps into the position of being the chief law enforcement officer of Maricopa County, the sheriff of the fourth largest county in the nation. He's in over his head. He doesn't have the confidence in himself. He's got the ego, but he doesn't have the confidence and ability, and he knows it. And so subsequently, he doesn't trust himself. So then he doesn't trust anyone else in his staff. Matter of fact, some of the people that he brought over, matter of fact, all of them except one that I'm aware of, that he brought over with him from Phoenix PD quit on him in a short period of time. And so other people, career law enforcement officers, career deputy sheriffs, began to quit on him because he didn't have the confidence in them. He started investigating everybody for everything. Mm-hmm. There was just a newspaper article last week from the Associated Press. It was on the local news. There are 1,800 active internal investigations against the employees of MCSO, and most of them are over 400 days old. They only have, by state law, he only has 180 days from start to finish. Otherwise, he's in violation of state law. So go figure out why nobody's chased him down for that. So they live and work under a very oppressive organization. So they've been quitting since 2017. This has happened over the last 3.5 years. He can't just blame this on the local or the recent, defund the police and low morale across the country. This has happened since 2017. This is why I'm running. I'm running because the people at MCSO began to ask me to run in 2017 as people began to quit. And I'll make it quick, but I'll give you a great example. I went to the police academy with a guy, and he was a great deputy sheriff. His son, grew up in the passenger seat of his dad's patrol car. I watched him grow up. He became a deputy sheriff. He was promoted to lieutenant. He worked for me as a lieutenant. He was great deputy sheriff, dedicated, knew the job, given difficult assignments and all that. I retire, I leave. He quits about 8 months, a year, maybe a year later, with 18 years on the job, to go get a job in a small town police department in northern Arizona. This guy was born and bred to be a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy, but yet he couldn't take it because he's got this city sergeant running the sheriff's office. And his culture's difference. You work for
Sure. Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
a culture difference between a municipal police department and a sheriff.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it goes back, Jerry, to what you said, learning to communicate and talk with people. And one observation I made, being a deputy and then also being affiliated with municipalities. You know, a city cop, he gets on the radio and calls for backup. 2 minutes, he's got 12 guys there. Now, you get a deputy out there somewhere in the hinterlands, and he calls for backup. He may wait 45 minutes. So you learn to kind of communicate with people, or you're going to walk away.
You know, I've got a great story to illustrate that point. The day I learned that lesson, I was relatively new deputy, maybe on a couple months. It was a Sunday morning. I got a call of a traffic accident, minor traffic accident. I get out there and I find out there's this little old lady, and there's an outlaw motorcycle gang member, right? So I go up to this very big, burly outlaw motorcycle gang member with all my 145 pounds soaking wet. And I says, hey, can I get your driver's license and proof of insurance? And he looks at me and he goes, F you. And he turns around and starts to walk away. And I says, hey, wait a second, I need to talk to you. And he turns around and he goes, F you. And it's like, hey, I'm talking to you, mister. And turns around, and guess what? Fight's on now. And so I learned real quickly that you can get somebody on the ground, because I was in great shape because I just got out of the police academy, right? And he wasn't in such great shape. So after about 10 minutes of struggling around, I got him on the ground, but I couldn't get the handcuffs on him by myself till some guy passing by got out of his car. I wish I knew who this guy was. He helped me get the handcuffs on him, jumped back in his car, and took off. But, you know, you've got to learn those skills of how to talk to people, right?
Sure.
I mean, you just can't say, hey, I got a badge and a gun here. You need to do what I say. It doesn't work that way.
No,
you know,
sure doesn't.
But I tell you what, I learned my lesson that day, because my backup was 45 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's the difference in being a deputy in a municipality. Now, nothing against the municipalities. They need those backup immediately.
Oh, yeah. I relied on them.
Yeah.
They knew when MCSO called for a backup, they'd send 10 guys, because they knew when a deputy sheriff was calling for a backup, they really needed help.
Yeah. Well, I had a partner who says, why call for backup? By the time they get here, it's all over anyway.
Yeah.
Well, so, okay, Jerry, we're going to wrap up here pretty quick, but I want to give you a chance now. Tell me about being a sheriff of Maricopa. I want to hear what you have to offer people, other than, I know the morale issue is really tugs at your heart, because you see, you know, something you were in charge of for so long just kind of going down the tubes. And it makes sense. The current guy, he stepped into something way over his head. I mean, just to inherit a jail system when you come off of supervising a squad of patrol guys in Phoenix, that's major. And I know that there's a lot of politicians and things involved in this whole gig. You don't hear a word about the current sheriff because he's a Democrat. Now, if it was a Republican doing any of that, I mean, they'd be harassing, falling around like they did Joe. So tell me about how this is going to work. I mean, as when you become sheriff, I know the morale issue. What else you got going on?
All right. I know time's very short, so I'll give you one other issue.
Okay.
This is the key issue. This is the key issue today. You heard President Trump talk about it in his acceptance speech. Civil unrest is just the beginning. We've had a major riot in Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Tempe. The current sheriff sat on his ass and did nothing. The sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of this county. The sheriff gets that authority from the people through the Arizona Constitution. He has a constitutional obligation, it says it right there in the law, to prevent, suppress, affrays, and riots. He has not done so. I, as your sheriff, as a constitutional conservative Republican, will not be standing behind my deputies and posse members, which I will bring back, by the way, telling them what to do. I will be in front of them, helping the Phoenix Police Department, Scottsdale Police Department, Tempe Police Department in suppressing these riots, because they need the help, and it's the sheriff's constitutional responsibility to do that. There is as big a difference between the current Democrat sheriff that you have and what I represent as a career deputy sheriff who's now seeking to be your sheriff, as there is between President Trump and Joe Biden. You have that big of a difference of a choice between me and Sergeant Paul.
Well, I tell you what, Jerry.
It's critical who your sheriff is, because the civil unrest is not going to stop. They've already threatened that. You need somebody that's going to be out there to protect your safety and your property.
Well, there's only one thing that would keep me from voting for you, Jerry. Now, this may not be fair to you, but I'm going to ask you to commit to something. If, in fact, you become the Sheriff of Maricopa County, will you make a commitment not to kneel with the protesters?
Well, that's normally part of my speech. Kneeling is a sign of submission.
Yeah.
I only kneel before God.
There you go.
My wife.
Well, it sounds like...
And I promise.
I'm going to pull the lever for you, Jerry. Nothing irritates me more, I'll tell you. So listen, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us on the Boys in Blue podcast, and best to you on your run for Sheriff of Maricopa County. And we'll have to have you on the podcast after the election to see how things shake out. But thank you again, and we'll see you again on the road. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Boys in Blue podcast. Again, I'm your host, retired police officer Bill McReynolds. Boys in Blue comes out every other week. Subscribe to the Boys in Blue wherever you get your podcast. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please do us a favor. Give us a 5-star review and let us know what you think.